Thanks, everyone. I've met many of you, and it's been really educational. Just to give you a little bit about me, as Dave said, I'm Director of Organizational Development at Skagit Regional Health, and I have been there for just 2 years, and I'm actually new to healthcare. So this is my first job in the healthcare industry, and prior to that, I worked in the banking industry. I'm very passionate about communication, which is why I love what I do. I also have 2 teenagers, so right now the communication that I deal with mostly at home is the nonverbal type with lots of eye rolling and heavy sighs. So that's me. Is this my clicker? Okay. So I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. We actually, we're located just north of Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, about an hour north. And we are made up of 3 different organizations that really have come together over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, Skagit Valley Hospital merged with Skagit Regional Clinics and brought together those 2 organizations. So Skagit Valley Hospital was a hospital in a rural community, and the clinics network was a physician-owned clinic network. And then 2 years ago, Cascade Valley Hospital, a smaller hospital that is about a half-hour south of us, also joined the organization. So it's really a combination of those 3 entities. And we have, between those 3, about 2,600 employees and 4 unions covering 3 counties. So a lot going on there. And what I'm going to share with you, while there's a long history going back to 1958 when those 2 hospitals first were formed, what I'm going to share with you today is just the last 2 years, which I think many of my colleagues would probably agree felt somewhat like 50 years into. So I'm going to start with this word cloud, which really is what we've been through in our journey just over this 2-year period. So I'm going to start off with January of 2016. We started our 18-month Epic conversion, which many of you have been through. I'm seeing lots of heads nodding. And so large undertaking. And with that, as all of you HR folks know, comes a lot of new employees being brought into the mix. So we had over 100 I think Leanne talked about this yesterday. We had over 100 new staff members that were brought on just for that project. What that required us to do was also move our business office and our business folks, so our finance, HR, some of our IT folks off of the hospital campus into a separate building. So again, more change for the staff. We then, 6 months after that, finalized the merger or the affiliation with Cascade Valley Hospital. That then brought 400 additional staff, 2 more unions into the fold, so more disruption. From there, we then, not long after, about a month after, this was a week before I started with the organization, their long-term CEO retired somewhat unexpectedly, sooner than had been planned. So another disruption to add to the mix. Over the next year, the COO was actually promoted into an interim CEO position. We were faced with our first year ever of having a financial loss, and with that came the announcement of a reduction in force. The search for a new CEO, permanent CEO. The long-term CFO, who'd been there 30 years, also retired. And on top of that, we decided to do an employee engagement survey right in the middle of it. So needless to say, by the time we got to the end of that 2-year period and when I came on board, morale was pretty much in the tank. We were struggling morale-wise. So we then finally had a couple of wins. And the first one was that our Epic launch went off very well. So that was huge for the staff because, as you know, that is just a beyond stressful time. The second thing was we hired 2 external members of our C-suite. We hired a new CEO. Brian Ivey came to us from Dignity Health in California, and we also hired an external CFO, Paul Ishizuka, who had worked at UW Medical Center, among other places. Both of them came into our organization, and suddenly they brought a different approach to communication. They were very open. They were very candid, and it felt different. It felt exciting. But of course, as you're just getting to know these new people that have joined your leadership team, it takes a while to really get a feel for what their style is going to be like. We actually then started talking about how do we get the employees more engaged? How do we bring these different entities together as one system? And I remember having Brian and some of the other folks on the executive team start talking about doing another employee engagement survey. And I knew, given our history, the last 2 employee engagement surveys that the organization had done, and this will make you all cringe as HR folks, the results were never shared with the staff. So I knew doing a 3rd employee engagement survey at that point was going to fall very flat and not get us where we needed to go. So I remembered that several years ago, my kids' school district had actually used a platform that I had never experienced before. And it was one in which they asked a very broad question and then posed it to the parents and the students and the teachers as to what we felt was most important for the school district to consider as they built out their 5-year strategic plan. And as I remembered going through that, and as a participant, I thought, what a great format. What a great way to really understand what it is that we're looking for. So I did a little research, found the ThoughtExchange. That's who our school district had used. Funny enough, our marketing manager, as I was talking with her, she had gone through the same thing at a different school district. So we had that common understanding of what this platform could bring. So the next piece was getting buy-in from a CEO who I didn't really know. And being new to the organization, that was a little scary. But thankfully, Brian was, he saw the value in it pretty quickly. So we started down the journey, and with the help of Dave and his team at the ThoughtExchange, we started putting together a plan that included a communication plan, obviously, to educate the staff and the leaders about how this platform worked. The next step, which this was key, I will say, and it came from Dave's team, we decided to actually pre-launch the ThoughtExchange out to our leadership team. We have about 120 leaders, and our employee experience team, which is a newly formed group that I co-chair with our director of marketing. And this team is tasked with employee engagement. And it brings different folks, both leaders and non-leaders from across the organization. So we had both of those groups actually do the ThoughtExchange ahead of time so that they could understand how it worked and be champions once we launched live to the rest of the organization. Excuse me for a quick second. So we then did some quarterly forums, and this was something that our CEO had already done during the first quarter of the year. And when he had gone out that first time, he actually had shared which I so appreciated. He went to the staff. It had been 6 months since the last employee engagement survey, and he actually shared what the results were and said, you know what? We never did this. This was a misstep on our part, even though he hadn't been there when we did the engagement survey. So they already saw in this forum setting where he was meeting with different groups of employees that there was a different type of open communication going on. So we scheduled our second set of forums to lead up to our launch of our ThoughtExchange. And so that gave him an opportunity to directly talk with the staff at our different facilities about what we were doing. So we really did a lot of pre-work setting the stage for it. So we got to the first day of the launch, and since we're being transparent, I'm going to tell you what it felt like. It felt like this on Go Live Day for me. Sweaty hands, heart racing, second-guessing myself, faking confidence, and silent praying. Because suddenly, where we usually, with an employee engagement survey, we're controlling what the questions are. We're controlling what kind of feedback we want. Suddenly, we were giving that control away to everyone in this organization who we knew were not necessarily in a good place. So to say it was not scary would be completely lying to you. It was. But I also had my executive team and my CEO really supporting that. So that was fabulous. So our question was, and again, very broad, what are some perspectives we need to understand as we work together to improve the culture at Skagit Regional Health? So we put it out there. The exchange was open for 2 weeks, and we weren't sure what to expect since this was really new to the staff and very much a departure from what we had done previously. So we got several things out of this. The first thing that we received was quick wins. We were able to harvest a lot of things through the thoughts that the staff were contributing that we could implement right away. And that was key to us being able to gain their confidence, for us to be able to start to change how they felt about the organization. It was empowering them to impact change. So a quick example that I will give you, Dave would probably like me to talk about parking, because that's the one that they thought was hilarious, because we have parking issues, and parking came up in the thoughts quite frequently. We've since done a good job of fixing that, because we're in the middle of our second exchange, and we haven't heard anything about parking yet. So, but one of the things that I thought was really powerful was we have a process when any manager wants to hire new employees, they go through our FTE committee process. And apparently, one of the things that was happening is the process was really slowing down the ability to hire replacement staff, because they were having to go through the same process as if they were asking for a new position. And this came up time, it really bubbled up to the top rather quickly. And our new CFO actually was surprised by it and said, I had no idea that this was such a barrier. So it was really eye-opening for him. To his credit, it was probably maybe 2 weeks after we closed our exchange. We had a leadership team meeting. He stood up and said, I had no idea that this was such a big deal. And he said, and these are his words, this is on me. I made this change, and we're going to fix it. And so since that time, they have changed it so that replacement positions are fast-tracked through instead. So again, it was really powerful for the staff to be able to see that their thoughts bubbled up to the top. We all could read them. CFO sees it. He makes a change. So those quick wins were really exciting for us. The second thing that we received, and this was where Dave's team really comes into play, is we had received back from them all the different themes that were most prominent. So they collect all the thoughts and they spit back at you all of these different themes. And we were able to use those as our executive team went into their strategic planning sessions. So through that strategic planning, and I was able to sit in through the engagement piece of that, they were constantly looking at the information that came directly from the staff. So again, it gave the staff the ability to see their thoughts, their ideas, the themes that they felt were most important, driving that future strategic plan. The third thing that we received, again, being very transparent, was a lot of venting. We got a lot of employees who were frustrated, and they shared that in the exchange. And I want to talk a little bit about that piece, because given where we were at as an organization after all of the change that we had come off of, even one of those things that I had up in that word cloud, any one of those things by itself is going to be a major disruptor to an organization. Having all of that happen in a 2-year period was crazy. So we knew that it was going to be negative, but probably about day 4 of the exchange being open, I started having a steady stream of my colleagues, of leaders from within the organization coming into my office and saying to me one-on-one, "This doesn't feel good. I'm not sure we should have done this. This is really negative." And to each one of them, I said, "Is there anything you're reading in the Thought Exchange that you didn't already know?" And all of them to a person said, "Well, no." And I said, "Okay, so now basically everything that was being said behind the scenes, being whispered over in the break room corners, we're now saying it out loud. We're now able to talk about things and address things. And I know that it feels icky right now, but this is what we have to do to move forward to improve the culture." And to be honest, I think by doing it this way, as hard as that is to swallow your pride and hear all of that, I really do feel, even though we're in the middle of it still, I feel like it's moving us faster toward where we want to be because we are able to have those real conversations. So that was a really important piece of it. The other thing that happened, and it was really interesting, the timing of it, it was at the end of the first week, and I had that steady stream of leaders coming in who were feeling beat up. And I had one of the employees who I really didn't know very well. We worked in the same building, but I had several employees come up and thank me for allowing them to use this platform. But I had this one gentleman come in, and he said the same thing. He said, "I just want to thank you. This is really, really cool." And I said, I really appreciate hearing that. I said, to be honest, a lot of the leaders are feeling a bit beat up because there's so much negative that's being put into the Thought Exchange. And he looked at me, and without skipping a beat, he said, "If it wasn't negative, we wouldn't believe it. We wouldn't trust it because we all know how we're feeling." So that was an important, and that's why I wanted to talk about, while the venting is painful, especially from a leadership perspective, it's important. I mean, it really was a key part of it. So, couple of takeaways that I want to share with you. So the first takeaway is transparency starts at the executive level. And this is just a screenshot of our microsite that we created for the Thought Exchange. And it had an intro video with our CEO, took you directly into the Thought Exchange. And since that time, we've also built a feedback update blog into this site. So as we are making changes based on the feedback that we are receiving from the Thought Exchange, we are posting that into our blog. So it's one area that the employees can go into at any given time and be able to see how their feedback is impacting change within the organization. And if it hadn't been for Brian's ability to recognize the value of this, and honestly, to be really vulnerable, especially as a brand new CEO in an organization, to do something that was such a departure, I have a ton of respect for him for allowing us to take this leap. My second takeaway is that the world is ready for transparency. And I think we see that every day across all the different social media platforms. But really, this is a huge opportunity for us to let the employees start to have more of a voice in how the organization is run and what's going on and what's important to them. And as scary as it is, it really is very impactful. My third takeaway, the conversations are happening. As I said to those leaders, the conversations that they were seeing, those thoughts that they were seeing, made them nervous. It made them uncomfortable. But all of them had heard those same conversations. They had just heard them quietly. They hadn't been talking about them. We hadn't been being open and honest about where we were. And so really the question becomes, do you want to be part of that conversation, or do you simply want to sit on the sidelines, pretend like those conversations aren't happening, and hope that things change on their own? So that is really probably at the heart of it. And you can see up here, we had almost 800 people participate in this thought exchange. They contributed 622 thoughts, and you can see how many of them were rated. And one of the other things that I think is important to keep in mind with the thought exchanges, when we don't have a method to do this, oftentimes it's the loudest voices who we think speak for the majority, because those are the people that we're hearing. But what happens with the thought exchange, and I think what else is also very powerful, is those thoughts might not be what the majority agree with, but those folks might not be willing to speak up, right? So what happens is those thoughts by those loud voices might be entered into your exchange. But even if people don't put their own thoughts in, they have the power of rating the thoughts that have been submitted. And if they don't agree with those voices, even if they're the loudest voices, those thoughts actually drop down to the bottom. And suddenly you get a more equitable representation of what it is that your entire organization is really feeling. And that's where I think it's really also a very powerful tool. A lot of folks that first time around, as you can see, they might not have put thoughts in, but they did participate in that way. We actually are, just to sum it up, we're in the middle of, we launched our first thought exchange in June. We now just launched, right before I flew out here, we just launched our second one. And what we did was we took the themes that came from our first exchange, and one of the top themes that we needed to work on was communication. So this second thought exchange that we're in the middle of right now is focused now more on communication and asking staff to give us input on how they feel we can improve communication. So we went from a very broad, tell us how you feel, vent, 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 to okay, you told us that communication is broken. So now help us understand what that might look like and how we can make that better. So again, as I said at the beginning, we're very much in the middle of it. We're actually in the very beginning of this change. We're excited to continue to use the Thought Exchange tool as we go through this process. And I actually have leaders coming to me with ideas now that we've used it twice of how they can actually use it within their own departments, and lots of creativity around that. I can't wrap this up with a nice bow for you, though, because we're so early in the process. But what I will tell you is I encourage you to really think about the power of getting all those voices and giving employees the opportunity to weigh in on that. So, any questions?
Let's do a round of applause for Tracey.
Thank you.
Thank you, and in Thought Exchange fashion, we have enough time that we're going to do something cool here to wrap that up. So, I mean, obviously, I wanted Tracey to come talk because you can just feel in her the devotion she has to understanding people. So I know that it's a product placement, but it's also kind of like a Tracey placement. Obviously, we're totally honored to work with her because you can hear in her voice the dedication she has to the people that she's working with. So I just want to thank you, Tracey, for that and the ongoing journey that you're going through.